My name is Bill Snyder. I was born in March 24th, 1929, right here in Niotta, Tennessee. I went to local schools. I joined the Tennessee National Guard in 1948 after the unit got back from camp. In 1950, we were activated. By that time, I had made corporal. And we were sent to Fort Devens, Massachusetts to replace or fill in for where the 7th Infantry of the 3rd Division was. We stayed there and trained draftees out of the New England area. Fortunately, I got to go to school at Fort Benning. I was 3-month school in January 1 to January 1 to April 1. Okay, in January 1, 1951, I got to go to school at Fort Benning. INR and Operations Chief. We had people from all of the major divisions, 4th Division, 82nd Airborne, the National Guard units had been activated. The 278th unit, I was the only one from it. I was the only member of the 278th in the school that I went to at Fort Benning. After the school was up, I went on back to Fort Devens. Meanwhile, the unit or the regiment had been moved to Pine Camp, New York. Pine Camp is now Fort Drum. That's the home of the 10th Mountain Division today. And we opened the post up. It had been closed down. During the summer, we trained different National Guard and other units that came up there, and we ran problems for them. We also sent a company to West Point to act as school troops for the cadets. And this was during that period of time that went on. Also, the 2nd Battalion during that summer was sent to Iceland. I'm not sure how long they stayed because I was put on orders around the 1st of August to go to Korea. They had a levy out of all areas in the United States Army at that time, so I happened to get caught in that. By that time, I'd made sergeant, and so when we got to Stoneman, we processed, and all people who had reserve commissions were called out and taken and probably recommissioned and sent over by airplane as we went over on a ship. When we got to Camp Drake in Japan, we were assigned to different units and processed, and then on another sailing vessel and came into Korea, and this was on about the first week of September 1951. When we got to, after we shipped out of Japan and got to Korea, we went into Incheon. Now, this was strictly administrative landing. It was at night, and we had to go in when the tide was down to where we could get we had to go in when it was up because it was low, and there's about a 30-foot tide there. We offloaded and got on a train and went up to Chuncheon, which was the division rear for several divisions at that time. 7th Division was one of them. To go back, when we left Japan, I was on orders. The orders had been cut, and I was supposed to go to 1st Cavalry Division. But somewhere along they changed and sent all of us to the 7th Division. Maybe they needed us worse at that time. After we got to Division Rear, they loaded us in trucks and took us on up to where the 17th was bivouacked at that time. Our platoon was on a hillside in pup tents. They haven't been there long because the pup tents. I was assigned to the 17th to the INR platoon. Well, I knew basically what they did, but not really. I'd been in an S2 section in the States. I joined the INR platoon, like I say, it was probably about the end of the first week in September. The weather was still pretty good. We were sleeping in pup tents on the hillside, no padding. All I can remember is the first night they started, our artillery behind us started shelling up ahead, and it jarred the ground, you know, and scared the fool out of us that hadn't heard it before. I was one of the few that was either a National Guard or reservist at that time, because everybody else, or most of them, were draftees. I guess about 20% were regular Army people. When I joined, there wasn't a first three grader in the platoon. The platoon sergeant had just got busted for getting drunk or some other offense. I don't really know why. But he was still in the unit, but he had busted him back to corporal. And the platoon sergeant was a corporal acting as platoon sergeant. When I joined the unit, I joined the 17th Regimental INR platoon. Colonel Howell D. McCowan had just taken over as regimental commander, relieving Colonel Quinn. After we'd been there a few weeks, we did some patrols with our jeeps and various things, and the unit moved into the Hwachon Valley area, and we had a little free time, so we were on the Hwachon Lake. It had been reported that the Navy aircraft had destroyed Hwachon Dam. Well, they may have knocked out the power plant, but they didn't destroy the dam, because we were on the lake behind it in a little engineer boat. We didn't have a lot of activity going on at that time, and as the fall wore on, they heard rumors that we were going to move into the Punch Bowl. So the regiment moved into the Punch Bowl. They fed us Thanksgiving dinner early and took us as far as they could in vehicles. Then we walked the rest of the way to get on a hill that was north of the Punch Bowl. It was over the rim of the Punch Bowl and then went down to another hill and then up, which was lower than the northern rim of the Punch Bowl. It was 3rd Battalion. I'm sorry, it was 2nd Battalion. Then we went up and filled in a spot with them. We'd walked all day just to get up there. The platoon sergeant, or Ingram, he was acting platoon sergeant at the time, advised us not to wear 4-buckle overshoes, that feet would get too hot walking up there. But it had rained, and then it started turning cold. We had just had regular World War II combat boots at this time. We didn't have the thermal boots, which we later got. By the time we got up there, it was dark. We didn't have positions to follow, and we just got in the hole where we could find him. During the night, all the commotion, hell started breaking loose, and they had a Bonsai attack on us. Another guy, and I don't even remember who it was, we were in a hole, and the lieutenant come around and said, hey, there's a heavy 30 machine gun up here on the hill up there. There's nobody on it. You guys get up on that machine gun. So this heavy 30 had just sitting there idle. So we got on that machine gun and started shooting at the North Koreans that were attacking us at the time. They were blowing their horns and making all kind of there's lots of flares going off, and we could see them coming at us. We fired all the ammo that we had, and then we just had to rely on our rifles at that position. I don't know whether I killed anybody that night, but we did burn up an awful lot of ammo shooting at people. But the next morning, it was a lot colder than it was when we went up there, and boots had frozen on people's feet because they were really wet. We had 3 people killed that night. Harold Urban, Slofelt, he was out of the Minnesota National Guard, and a guy named Bugosh. I'm sorry, Moose. Moose was his nickname, and I can't think of his last name. But they found their bodies the next morning. The next morning, there was so much devastation around. Anything that had been on top of the ground was splintered, like rifle butts and shelter halves, or anything that had been on top that there's holes in it. And people started gathering up and see what they could survive. The platoon leader got us together, and we assigned our squads to certain holes at that time. So we stayed up there, and the second night is when it really got cold. It got so cold that, you know, they were afraid even the weapons wouldn't have been fired that night. We stayed on this hill. No Name Hill was the name of it. And then there's a write-up in the paper about the unit. About 2 weeks. Then they decided that strategically we didn't need the ridge anymore, so we pulled off. We moved to another position on the hill before we came off, and we had a platoon area of our own, and we felt a lot more secure because we were all together as a platoon. I know there was a dead body on the just forward of the hole I was in, and it seems like every night that dead body got up and crawled toward me, but the next morning to be laying in the same place. We didn't have any more casualties until we started to pull off the hill. When the decision was made to come back off of the hill, I brought half of the platoon off first, and the lieutenant stayed with the other half, or the platoon sergeant. And then blowing up the ammo that we'd carried up, they didn't want to leave anything for them. The platoon sergeant pulled the wrong pin out of a mine, and it blew him down the hill. It didn't kill him immediately, but he died shortly there. And the rest of the squad that I was over, they helped carry him off there and carried his body off. And then the next morning after this attack, you could see dead bodies out from us on the same hillside, all scattered around. Evidently, there had been a lot of mortar shells that had hit some of them out there, because most of them were in a position where small arms fire probably wouldn't have got to them. I don't know how many the platoon area killed that night. I've never seen any or heard any figures on that. All I know is that we had those 3 people killed, and I don't think we had anybody else wounded that night. There was a lot of devastation around our area, and of course, in looking off the hill down, you couldn't really see how many of the Koreans were down there, but there had to be several of them that were killed. So anyway, that was the last attack, full attack, that we had while we were up there. I think our mortar and artillery probably helped out an awful lot in that respect. But anyway, if we hadn't have fired our weapons, some of them would have got to our positions by that morning. We found Durbin's nameplate. We wore our names on a piece of acetate with the combat badge on it, and to identify, and that was how we identified him. The other 2 guys, I don't remember how they identified them, but after we moved down to the other position, after being in that extreme cold, we lost other people. Other people they go off because their feet were frostbitten. By the time the 2-week period was up, I guess about half of the platoon was gone. So we really weren't effective as a platoon anymore. Now, most of those guys did rejoin us. Some didn't. I know a boy named Copus from Alabama National Guard. We heard that he had to have his toes amputated. My friend Guy Hamrick from down at Duluth, Georgia, he had trouble with his feet, or he has trouble with his feet today. Fortunately, I took care of mine a little better, or I tried to. I had socks that I changed, and I wiggled my toes all night long every night up there when it was so cold. The casualties that we had, like I say, was those 3 men, and then the platoon sergeant when we pulled off, and then another guy named Bogart, a piece of shrapnel hit him near the heart, and we thought he was wounded bad, but he wasn't. So in all, on that little stint up there for 2 weeks, we had 5 casualties. Our next main combat activity was that the INR platoon was assigned to relieving a rifle platoon 2 or 3 days at a time, letting them come off and take a shower and have a little R&R. So that's what we did with that. So we went up on the hill and went in their positions and would stay, say, with where 1st platoon was. Then after about 3 days, we'd move over into another area and let another platoon be relieved. After a 2-week rest, we decided, well, we didn't decide, the powers that be decided that they would use us as a relief platoon to relieve 3rd Battalion, 1 platoon at a time, or the line companies. And so we did that starting about, I guess, the middle of December. So we were doing that. We would go up and stay about 2 or 3 days in one spot, and then we'd move over to another spot, let another platoon come off the line and take a shower, and have a day's rest and get some hot food. The only casualty we had during that time as a platoon was one night the Koreans sent out a patrol and threw a grenade in a hole, and named Fletcher was our member of our platoon, and the grenade came in, and in getting it out, it went off in his hand and blew his arm off before he could get rid of it. This squad, or I say this patrol, this Korean patrol had been there for a while, because the next day we found where the snow was all packed down on the north side of the ridge. So they'd been standing in that area for a long time, so it's a miracle that they didn't throw more grenades and more holes up there. But it stirred up the whole platoon that night, but the next morning we thought we might have killed somebody, but we didn't. Everybody was shooting at something, but never did hit anybody, and so the Koreans got away. So after, I guess we didn't get all the way through the battalion, but we probably got all the way through one company, and then they decided against using us to do that, and then we spent the Christmas period, I'm thinking we were on another hill. We really weren't occupying a position of relief at that time. We had our own positions. I know that they brought us ice cream and set it out beside a tree there, and it just stayed there because it wasn't going to thaw. Of course, the same thing would happen to water too. So they'd bring water up and it'd freeze before we could drink it. Then later, probably in January, we went up on Heartbreak Ridge and set up an OP. At that time, of course, it was in our hands. It had already been taken, I think, by the 2nd Division. But we had a observation post up there. We had a BC scope, and we could see a long way north. And we could see troop movements coming down the mountain there. And we had reported but there was never much done about it. They'd fire a round or two up through there, maybe a white phosphorus or something like that, but there's never a whole lot of shelling done. Yes, the troop movement that we saw, the enemy troops were on the same ridge line that the ridge run kind of north, and we could see them coming at us and moving down this way. Now, some of them had on white uniforms, but you could still see the movement, you know. There's enough dark that you could see them coming down. Now, whether they were Chinese or North Koreans, I don't know. But the decision was made only, well, it was above our heads. They fired a few rounds, but didn't destroy many enemy troops at that time. And it was after that that we occupied a position on a ridge where we could hear enemy troops talking over there, and they'd yell at us. And they'd tell us, well, you troops be off the hill by Christmas. Well, we didn't make it. But they were speaking English and yelling at us. Well, we'd shoot at their bunkers. We had a guy there that was with us that was part of the weapons platoon. They had a recoilless rifle, and they'd tear down their bunkers that they'd build up at night, and you can hear them at night rebuild them over there. We didn't have any casualties, I don't think, at that time, but every night was a new experience because you knew that they were subject to send out a two-man patrol and throw a grenade in the hole. It wasn't anything major, but it's something to keep you jittery all the time. Now, while we were on those hills at that time, we had good air support, and the best air support we had was from either Navy or Marine Corsairs. They were better at it. The Air Force had they had the F-86 jets, I think, at the time, or they were too fast though. So, but they did have some 51s. But these Corsairs, they could dip right down into those valleys, and they dropped a lot of napalm up in the valleys ahead of us. Another thing that they decided to do that I thought was kind of foolish, they had these quad 50s set up behind us. And they'd shoot over us up into this valley ahead of us up there, and they fired rounds that had a little exploding shell that they just pop when they'd go off. But it made so much racket, all of these bullets going overhead, that a platoon or an army could have sneaked up on us at the time. So we complained about all the racket that they were doing, and finally they did stop shooting those quad 50s over us. I don't know whether they ever killed anybody or not, but I know that it made a lot of racket. One of the best things that we had going for us up there was the outfits that operated the searchlights. They'd set up behind us over there, and you know, on a cloudy night, if they could pick up a cloud that'd be over us, it illuminated the area an awful lot, and that was a great big help. It wasn't near as black up there, but if they happened to move one of those search lines and then readjusting it, it would really get dark. And it worked better when there were some clouds up there too, because if it was a clear sky, then you didn't get that reflection. The searchlight outfits, they were mounted on the back of a deuce and a half somewhere, and I don't know, they operated all over the peninsula there. The next duty that we had after that was, well, in February we came off the hill, and we were back in the Hwachon Valley area, set up there. And we got to, well, we did a little training. The lieutenant had us running every morning. We had changed platoon leaders about that time. The fellow we had was first lieutenant. He'd been in 82nd Airborne, and he told us that if he didn't make captain soon, he wasn't in a position to be promoted as a platoon leader unless he got another duty. But he's the one that run us every morning. And we lost a whole lot of people during that time to rotation. It was, I think it was around the 1st of March, or is March, some early March maybe, that all of the guys had been there, that came in there about 10, 11 months ago, then they all left. And all the bulk of the people that we had after that were fairly new people. At that time, the makeup of the platoon was, well, probably about 60% draftees and about 25% regular Army, and the other 20, maybe 15% Reserve and National Guard people. The guys that we got later on, we didn't have any real activity as far as any hostile activity. We weren't shot at, or we didn't have any real hazardous duty at that time. Now, one other time that and I glossed over that, or I missed it, that we went on one hill there, and we were with another company or battalion. We were just a platoon up there. We occupied a spot, and they had done so much work up there, they'd even pulled tanks up on the ridge, old Sherman tanks, dug them in, and used them as artillery pieces. And we up there with that, and now the Koreans, they did a lot of shelling mortars and about chow time in that position. But fortunately, we didn't have any casualties to that. So when we came back down off the ridge that time, and this is the real fortunate part, although we did see combat and were in hazardous situations, we were a regimental headquarters company, or excuse me, regimental headquarters platoon, and that gave us a lot of privileges that the line companies didn't have, because we had our own transportation, and we were our own unit, and we were treated. We had a mess hall. They even brought us chow up when we was on the line. So, and the regular line companies didn't have that, I don't think. When we were on No Name Hill, the weather got extremely cold. Some say it was 20 below. I don't know. We didn't have a thermometer, but it was extremely cold. So we would burn sea ration boxes, try to get into a hole and make a little bit of fire. Well, I think it made more smoke than it did fire, but just anything to warm your hands. Now we had field jackets and the liner form, and I think we had parkas also, but we still didn't have the thermo boots. We got the thermo boots, it was after we come off of this hill. If we'd had thermo boots, I don't think we'd had any casualties as far as frostbite, as far as feet was concerned. But I know that we tried to fire, one night up there, we tried to fire a BAR up there that somebody had in the squad there, and it wouldn't work because it was so cold. So the next day, we made sure that we got the thing thawed out so that it didn't happen again. And there was always quietness when there wasn't anything going on, and then when somebody would fire a weapon, we didn't know whether they were firing it just to make it operate or whether they was firing at somebody. So there are a lot of things go through your mind at those times. You wonder what's going to happen next. And we started improving our holes, and the hole that Guy Hamrick and Floyd Graves was in, they kept hitting something in the bottom. Well, what they were doing, they were standing on some Korean bodies down there. So they got a hold of them. They got down to where they could dig or thaw them out and get them out of there. And I think there was two of them. So they slung them off down the ridge line, and that made their hole a lot deeper when they got rid of those bodies that was in there. And the ground was frozen so hard that you couldn't improve upon or dig your hole any deeper. Now, I know when we went up and set up that OP up on up top on Heartbreak Ridge, we even tried shaped charges to blow a hole or blow that deeper. And it was frozen so hard that it didn't do any good. So what you had to do was just try to reinforce what you had on top of you with what sticks or sandbags you could get. Fortunately, we had access to some sandbags that was around there, and we did make the position a little better. But if you hadn't already dug it, you wasn't going to dig it in that frozen ground, not with entrenching tools, or we didn't have any picks or mattocks or anything. The OP duty up there was pretty good because we didn't get shelled that much. We could look out upon the world up there and see the movement of troops north of us there, but we didn't get shot at that much. And I don't remember how long we stayed up there because usually those stints didn't last over 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and they'd move us to somewhere else. One thing, and the unit decided to, and this was the weather had warmed up, to go over and guard the peace talks. And we loaded up the regiment and moved over into the I-Corps area, where the British and Australians were, and set up over there. And they guarded the peace talks for about 2 weeks. And we stayed up there, and then we didn't do anything much, but do a little, well, we didn't do anything hardly any over there because we weren't involved. Our platoon wasn't in guarding the peace talks. So we stayed there, and then we moved back over to the east, around up there, around Kumwa, or we were fixing to occupy that and relieve the 25th Division when I left over there, and that was around the 1st of May, I think it was. So much of the time when we were up there, you later on heard about certain hills like Pork Chop or Old Bawley or 851 or whatever, but I didn't know what hill we were on. We didn't have access to maps and things. We were just told where to go. So we knew what people told us, but that's all we knew. We scouted that out, and of course Heartbreak Ridge had already been taken. Like I say, it was all just pummeled. I mean, it was just blasted to bits, and that's where we had our OP set up. But we had occupied it even it was after it had been taken. And another area was over east of there when we'd gone up through there, and we were able to travel most of the time without having to walk all the way up, and I don't remember what the name of the area was, but it was northeast of Chuncheon, on above the 38th parallel. In late April, we went up to scout out positions. We were to take over from the 25th Division, and that was in the Kumwa area. Now, it was flat, and we were looking at a valley there, but there was a hill which wasn't very high, but they had an OP set up, and we were going to occupy it, and they had Jeep windshields for windows in that thing, and that thing sandbag and ponchos to make it not so damp, and sandbags overhead. So it was, and they had bunkers dug, they had bunks built in them. So somebody had really done a great job about taking care of the situation. But I left just as a unit was being moved up to that, and we tried to get out of there after that. So I didn't occupy this nice OP up there at Kumwa.